As I'm sure you know, locators come in many shapes, sizes and colours, and are usually made up of two main components, the transmitter and the receiver. However, whatever the brand or the age of the locator, they fundamentally do exactly the same job. Whether it is something like the multi-antenna Rigid, the Ditch Witch T5 Plus, the SureLock, the single antenna Pipehorn, one of the best locators for inductive spillage, the quirky Schonstedt XT, the ever-reliable V-Lock Pro, or the industry-leading radio detection, in this case the RD8000. The transmitter is similar to a miniature power plant. It creates voltage, in this case alternating current. A pipe or cable energized by the transmitter carries alternating current. Alternating current flowing along a conductive line produces an electromagnetic field. Inside the transmitter there is a certain amount of circuitry, a power pack, normally made up of batteries, and one or more transmitting antennas. Different brands will have different configurations. There are two types of transmitting antenna, the air core and the ferrite core. However, both do exactly the same job. The air core antenna, as the name suggests, has nothing in its centre except air. Copper wire windings around a vacant centre allow the possibility of unlimited shapes. Here is an example of an air core antenna around the perimeter of the transmitter. Another example found in the early Rycom. Again, it is rectangular in shape and follows the path of the printed circuit board. You will also find an air core antenna in the 10-watt transmitter of the V-Lock Pro. In this case, it takes the shape of the handle and the body of the transmitter. The second type of transmitting antenna is a ferrite core antenna. A ferrite core antenna differs from an air core antenna in that the copper wire is wound around a ferrite rod. Some people say that the performance of an air core antenna is superior to the ferrite. However, they are intended to do identical jobs. Place an alternating current on the conductor so the electromagnetic field can be produced. An example of a ferrite core antenna can be found in this early model Metratech 810. Also note on the side of the transmitter the arrow. This is placed there so that you can orientate the transmitter in line with the target line. This early model RD transmitter, in this case an RD400, also has a ferrite core antenna. Note the arrows on the top of the transmitter and note the orientation of the ferrite core antenna. The orange line depicts where the target utility would be located. For inductive spillage, it is extremely important that the position of the transmitting antenna is orientated correctly. If it isn't, little or no energy will be put onto the target line. The copper windings of the transmitting antenna must run parallel to the expected path of the target line. Most transmitters will have an arrow that indicates the orientation that the transmitter must have to work correctly. These are examples of transmitters and the indicators placed on them to orientate the transmitter correctly. Let's now move on to the receiver. The receiver is designed to recognize the electromagnetic signal from the target line, process this information, analyze the reading from the various receiving antennas, and then display the findings in a meaningful way on the screen. You, as the locator, then interprets this information and determines where the location of the target line is. The key point is to ensure that the receiver is recognizing the most relevant information possible. The signal must be reliable. In other words, not jumping around and difficult to read. The readings must be steady and therefore a reliable indicator. The signal needs to be analyzed a number of ways, in other words, in peak and null, to ensure that an accurate locate is achieved. The receiver is made up of a number of receiving antennae, as well as circuitry to analyze the signal. The number and position of antenna vary from brand to brand, from the single antenna in a pipe horn to the multiple arrays in a rigid. Here we have a view of the inside of a typical receiver. In this case, it is an RD400. We can see that there is a number of printed circuit boards. Also, we see that there are 3 receiving antennas. You will notice that the antennas are oriented differently, and this is the key point. Their orientation is what allows them to receive the signal and analyze different aspects of it. In this particular receiver, there are 2 peak receiving antennas and 1 null receiving antenna. The peak antennas analyze the signal vertically, thus giving a signal strength, whilst the null antenna looks at the balance of the signal. Note also that there are 2 peak antennas. This is how the receiver calculates depth of the target. The null antenna looks at the balance of the signal. In other words, it's looking for the amount of signal on this side of the antenna and compares it to the amount of signal on this side of the antenna. It's looking for a balanced reading, the same amount on each side. The peak antenna looks for where the signal strength is strongest. If the receiver is moved left or right, the strength of the signal received reduces. Move it back towards the target line and the signal increases. The configuration of receivers differs from brand to brand. However, you will mostly find a peak antenna and a null antenna, as can be seen on this Rycom. This particular receiver is unusual because it uses all peak antennas. However, it produces an electronic null by comparing the signal from the 2 outer peak antennas on the lower cross configuration. The V-Lock Pro has antennas here, here, here and here. You will notice that each of the antennas are air core. In other words, they have airspace in the center. The 2 at the bottom are a peak and a null antenna, whilst the upper one is the second peak antenna with the middle one for a compass. It is important to know the workings of your equipment. The more that you know, the easier locating becomes and the better locator you become. The key points to remember about the equipment are they're usually made up of 2 components, the transmitter and the receiver. No matter the brand, they all basically do the same thing. The transmitter produces an alternating current, which then produces the electromagnetic field. The receiver recognizes the electromagnetic field and analyzes the signal 2 ways, in peak and null. Receivers usually have a number of antennas, and the orientation of the antenna determines the signal analysis.